Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. In the world of workplace safety, there are some topics that are just non-negotiable. And today, we're tackling one of those big ones. We're going deep on OSHA standard 1926.1206, which covers those entry permits for permit-required confined spaces.
Yeah, I mean, this is the bread and butter, really, for anyone who's working in construction, or really any field where you might encounter these spaces.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking about potentially dangerous situations here. So understanding this standard, well, it's not just about compliance. It's about making sure everything goes home safe at the end of the day.
That's right, no cutting corners.
So to help us dissect this, I've been digging into 1926.1206 itself, and, it's dense. But luckily, we've got an expert in workplace safety with us to break it all down.
Happy to be here.
All right, so let's jump right in. The standard, really hammers home the importance of the entry permit itself. I mean, it's more than just a piece of paper, right?
Oh, absolutely. At the entry permit, it's like, think of it as a contract or a safety plan or even a communication tool between everyone involved. Like, it clearly outlines the hazards specific to that confined space.
Right, so you know what you're dealing with before you even step foot in there.
Yeah, exactly. It outlines the steps to isolate those hazards, what the atmosphere is like in there, the testing results, and crucially, it lays out all the procedures for entry and for rescue, God forbid, if something goes wrong.
Makes sense. So it's a record of what's been done to make the space safe too.
Right. And if an emergency does happen, that permit, it's like the first thing responders are going to look at to understand what they're walking into.
Wow, so it's not just about permission, it's really the foundation of the whole safety operation.
Exactly. And, another key piece of this whole thing is knowing who's authorized to be in that space. Like 1926.1206 is super specific about keeping those entry rosters accurate, no exceptions.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. So you know who's down there and who to account for if you need to evacuate, right?
Absolutely. Imagine a situation. You've got a fire or a sudden release of, I don't know, some hazardous gas. You need to evacuate quickly. Every second counts. That roster, it can literally mean the difference between knowing everyone's out and having to send someone back in to search.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. You don't want anyone left behind in a dangerous situation.
Nope, not at all.
So we've got the permit. We know who's going in. But things can change inside the space, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the standard seems to really focus on ventilation.
Yeah, ventilation is key, especially, when you're dealing with spaces that might have limited oxygen or potentially hazardous fumes.
Right. You need fresh air.
Exactly. And what the standard really stresses, it's not just having ventilation, but having backup plans in place for when it fails.
Oh, okay. So what happens if the power goes out or your ventilation system malfunctions?
Exactly. You need a plan B and maybe even a plan C. Like maybe you have backup power for your blower fans. Maybe you're continuously monitoring the atmosphere with sensors. Or maybe you have strict procedures for immediate evacuation if the readings start to go south.
Wow. So it's about anticipating potential problems before they even become emergencies.
Absolutely. And it's all about having those procedures in place, practiced, so everyone knows what to do when the pressure's on.
And speaking of roles, the standard's really clear about who's responsible for what, right? We've got the attendant and the entry supervisor. And
Oh, yeah. 1926.1206 goes into a lot of detail on that. And it makes sense, In a potentially hazardous situation, everyone needs to know their role, who's in charge, and what to do. It's all about clear communication and coordination.
So let's break it down. Let's talk about the attendant. What's their job, according to the standard?
So the attendant, they're the lifeline, really, between the people inside of the confined space and the outside world.
Okay, so they stay outside.
Yeah, they're stationed outside, but they're constantly monitoring conditions, keeping an eye on the readings, maintaining communication with the folks inside, making sure they're okay.
Wow, so it's a big responsibility.
Yeah, it really is. And they're the ones who are ready to initiate that emergency plan we talked about if things go sideways.
And the entry supervisor, they're kind of the boss of the whole operation, right?
Yeah, you could say that. They're ultimately responsible for the safety of everyone involved.
So they have a lot on their plate.
Absolutely. They verify that the space is properly isolated, make sure all the energy sources are locked out, tagged out. They oversee the atmospheric testing to make sure it's breathable. And of course, they make sure everyone is following the procedures outlined in the entry permit, no exceptions.
So basically, they make sure all the I's are dotted and the It's are crossed.
Exactly. No room for error when it comes to confined spaces.
And the standard's really clear about hazard control, right? Even before anyone enters the space, there's a whole checklist of things to do.
Oh, yeah, that's crucial. You can't just assume a space is safe just because you've got a permit.
So what kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, for example, you might need to purge the space or inert the atmosphere, depending on what kind of hazards you're dealing with.
And what does that mean exactly? Like purging and inerting.
So, purging is basically replacing the existing atmosphere with fresh air. And inerting is like adding an inert gas, like nitrogen, to reduce the oxygen level and prevent combustion.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. And then there's the atmospheric testing, right?
Oh, yeah, the testing is absolutely non negotiable. You need to make sure the air is breathable before anyone goes in.
And that's not just like sticking your head in and taking a sniff, right?
No, definitely not. The standard is very specific about using calibrated equipment, testing for a whole range of hazardous substances like carbon monoxide, flammable gases, you name it.
So it's like a whole science to it.
Exactly. And you need to document all those results, keep a record, because that's your proof that the space was safe at the time of entry.
So no cutting corners on the testing.
Nope. And it's not just about compliance, it's about peace of mind, knowing that you've taken every precaution to protect your workers.
And if things do go wrong, the standard is also really thorough when it comes to having a rescue plan.
Oh, absolutely. When it comes to confined spaces, you can't afford to be unprepared. Things can go south very quickly.
So what kind of things does the standard say about rescue plans?
Well, first and foremost, you need to identify and evaluate potential rescue services. That could mean having a trained in-house rescue team, or it could mean calling 911. But it's not just about who you call, it's about having the right equipment, the right training, the right communication systems in place.
So like what kind of equipment are we talking about?
Well, it depends on the specific hazards of the space, but it could include things like retrieval systems, harnesses, breathing apparatus, the whole 9 yards.
Wow, so it's not just a matter of having a phone nearby.
No, definitely not. And the communication piece is really important too. Everyone needs to know who to call, what to say, how to describe the situation. A clear and concise communication plan can save precious time in an emergency.
And all of this needs to be practiced, right? Like the rescue plan can't just be something that sits on a shelf.
Absolutely. You need to rehearse, run drills, make sure everyone knows their role, and can execute the plan smoothly. Because in a real emergency, there's no time for hesitation.
So to kind of recap all of this, what would you say are the key takeaways from 1926.1206 for safety professionals?
Well, I think it all boils down to a few key principles: meticulous planning, crystal clear roles and responsibilities, hazard control before anyone enters the space, rigorous atmospheric testing, and a rock-solid rescue plan that everyone understands and can execute.
That's a great summary. This deep dive has been incredibly informative, and for our listeners, I really encourage you to go and check out the standard itself. It's dense, but it's packed with valuable information that could literally save lives. But as a final thought, I'd like to ask you this. How can you translate these requirements into a truly proactive safety culture in your own workplace? It's one thing to check all the boxes, but it's another thing entirely to truly champion safety at every level.
Yeah, it's about going above and beyond, making safety a core value, not just a set of rules to follow.
Exactly. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.